Police dog freezes with two puppies. What the police found behind the door was shocking. Snow fell silently over Atlanta that winter night, blanketing the empty streets in white. Max, the Belgian Malinois K9 unit, maintained his nightly vigil around Sarah Collins's house. The icy wind ruffled his dark fur as his amber eyes methodically scanned the darkness, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and weather alerts had warned residents to stay indoors. A low, trembling whimper pierced through the howling wind. His ears instantly moved toward the sound, his training kicking in automatically. Abandoning his post, Max followed the cry to the street corner, his paws crunching through the fresh snow. There, partially buried in a growing snowdrift, he found two puppies shivering uncontrollably, their small, fragile bodies barely visible in the darkness. Their fur was matted with ice, and their eyes held a desperate plea that made Max's protective instincts surge. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Max's rigorous K9 training told him to alert Sarah immediately. It was protocol for any suspicious activity. But something in those frightened eyes made him hesitate. The puppies, barely able to move in the intense cold, cowered as he approached, their tiny bodies pressing against each other for warmth. With unusual gentleness for a dog of his stature, Max positioned himself over them, using his muscular body as a shield against the cutting wind. He could feel their tiny hearts racing against his chest, their breaths coming in short, irregular gasps. Minutes dragged on as the temperature continued to drop. Max could feel the puppies huddling closer against his body for warmth, their trembling becoming more pronounced with each passing moment. His protective instinct fought against years of disciplined training and his duty to guard the house. Barking to wake Sarah would mean leaving the puppies momentarily unprotected in the cruel cold. The decision weighed heavily on his trained mind as he watched ice crystals forming on their delicate whiskers. The snowfall intensified, turning into a blinding curtain of white. Snow now partially covered Max's motionless body, but he remained steadfast, channeling the discipline that had made him one of Atlanta PD's most reliable K9 officers. The cold was beginning to penetrate even his dense protective coat, and he could feel the puppy's tremors diminishing, a worrying sign he recognized from his winter survival training. Small whimpers escaped their throats, becoming weaker with each passing moment. Their breathing had become shallow, and their small bodies felt increasingly still against his. Finally, gathering all his remaining strength, Max let out a deep, desperate bark that echoed down the silent street. The sound reverberated off the snow-covered houses, carrying with it the urgency of his situation. One of the puppies stirred weakly beneath him, while the other had grown disturbingly still, its tiny body barely moving. The wind howled mercilessly around them, drowning out the soft whimpers of the weakening puppies. Seconds turned into eternal minutes as he waited, torn between his instinct to run to Sarah's door and his commitment to protecting his vulnerable discoveries. The cold now bit through to his bones, numbing his legs and making his muscles tremble involuntarily. Yet Max remained like a living statue, an improvised guardian in the freezing night. The emergency lights from a passing snowplow briefly illuminated their desperate scene. A large police dog standing motionless in the deepening snow, protecting two tiny forms beneath him. His paws had long since lost feeling when a second bark, more urgent and primal than the first, tore through the silence of the early morning. It was all he could do now, wait for Sarah to understand his call, as the trio slowly froze under Atlanta's dark sky. The temperature display on a nearby bank sign flashed negative numbers, a dire warning of the dangerous conditions they faced. The streetlights cast eerie shadows across the pristine snow as Max fought against his own exhaustion. His extensive training had prepared him for many challenges, but nothing like this. His body shivered violently now, yet he maintained his protective stance over the puppies, his amber eyes fixed unwaveringly on Sarah's house. Each minute that passed felt like an eternity as he waited for a sign that his cry for help would be answered. before it was too late. Behind her darkened windows, Sarah slept peacefully, unaware of the life and death drama unfolding just yards from her front door. Max could only pray his desperate barks would penetrate her dreams and bring the help they so desperately needed as the night grew colder and the puppy's chances of survival grew slimmer with each passing moment. Sarah Collins woke with a start, her mind still foggy from sleep. Something had pulled her from her dreams, a sound both familiar and urgent, Max's bark. But this wasn't his usual alert bark. There was a desperation she'd never heard before in their 3 years together, a primal urgency that cut through the quiet winter night. Throwing off her warm blankets, Sarah shivered as her feet hit the cold floor. The bedroom thermometer read 15 degrees Celsius, unusually cold for Atlanta. Through her frost-covered window, the streetlights revealed a thick blanket of snow, at least 8 inches deep and still falling heavily. The weather alert on her phone flashed warnings of record-breaking temperatures. Her first instinct was to grab her service weapon from the bedside safe, but something about Max's bark didn't suggest danger. It was more pleading. Sarah had learned to read his different barks during their partnership, the sharp, authoritative bark for suspects, the rapid succession for drugs, and the deep rumble for weapons. But this was something entirely new, and it sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Another bark pierced the night, weaker this time, almost muffled by the howling wind. Sarah's heart rate quickened as she pulled on her winter police jacket and boots, her hands fumbling with the laces in her haste. Max never barked without good reason, and he certainly never abandoned his guard post unless something was seriously wrong. Years of K-9 unit training had made him one of the most disciplined dogs on the force. The blast of Arctic air that hit her face when she opened the front door nearly took her breath away. The wind cut through her clothes like ice needles, making her eyes water instantly. "Max!" she called out, her voice muffled by the falling snow and wind. No response came from the darkness. Sarah fumbled for her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness and swirling snow like a lighthouse beacon. What she saw made her blood run cold. There was Max, usually so alert and mobile, standing completely still about 20 yards from her door. Snow had accumulated on his back, suggesting he'd been there for some time, maybe hours. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pleading, desperate, fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip. His usual confident stance was replaced by something she'd never seen before, vulnerability. "Max! What is it? Come here, boy!" Sarah called again, but the usually obedient dog didn't move a muscle. Instead, he let out another bark, softer now, almost like a whimper. As Sarah trudged through the deep snow toward him, her police boots sinking with each step, she noticed something odd about his stance. He seemed to be hovering over something, his body curved protectively. The beam of her flashlight finally revealed the truth, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Beneath Max's body, barely visible in the snow, were 2 tiny forms. Puppies, no more than a few weeks old, huddled together for warmth. One appeared to be moving slightly, its small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, but the other lay disturbingly still. Ice crystals had formed on their whiskers and eyelashes. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her emergency response training kicking in as she quickly assessed the situation. Without hesitation, she stripped off her police jacket, ignoring the biting cold as she carefully wrapped it around the nearly frozen puppies. Max finally moved, his legs trembling violently as he stepped aside. How long had he been standing there, using his body heat to keep them alive? His fur was stiff with ice, and his usually proud stance was shaky from exhaustion. Racing back to her house, Sarah cradled the precious bundle against her chest, feeling for signs of life through the thick fabric. Behind her, Max followed on unsteady legs, his duty finally fulfilled, but his vigilance never wavering. The warmth of the house hit them like a wave as they burst through the door. Sarah quickly cleared her kitchen counter, laying out clean towels before placing the puppies under the bright lights. As she began gently rubbing warmth back into their tiny bodies, something caught her eye. markings on their ears that looked deliberate, almost like tattoos or brand marks. These weren't standard shelter or breeder identifications. They were something else entirely, something that made her police instincts tingle. Before she could examine them more closely, a flurry of movement outside her kitchen window drew her attention. In the swirling snow, she could have sworn she saw a figure quickly ducking out of sight. Just a shadow, but enough to make her reach instinctively for her service weapon. Max's low growl confirmed her suspicion despite his exhaustion. These puppies weren't just abandoned. They were left here intentionally, and someone was watching. Sarah's police instincts kicked into high gear as she realized this midnight rescue was about to become something much bigger. Her mind raced through possibilities: illegal breeding operations, dog-fighting rings, experimental testing. But first, she had 2 little lives to save, and 1 loyal partner to warm up. As she reached for her phone to call the emergency vet, she noticed Max's eyes weren't on the puppies anymore. They were fixed on the window, his posture rigid despite his exhaustion. The set of his ears and the bristling of his fur told her everything she needed to know. Whatever was going on, it was far from over. The security light outside suddenly flickered, casting strange shadows across her snow-covered yard. And in that brief moment of illumination, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that made her blood freeze colder than the winter night. Multiple sets of footprints in the fresh snow, all leading to and from where the puppies had been found. The snowstorm raging outside Sarah's kitchen window took her back 10 years to her first day at Atlanta PD's K9 training facility. Fresh out of the police academy, she'd chosen the K9 unit despite widespread skepticism. Her small frame and quiet demeanor didn't match the typical handler profile, they said, but Sarah Collins had never been one to follow expectations. Inside that facility, Sergeant Mike Davidson had introduced her to a young Belgian Malinois with intense amber eyes. "This is Max," he'd said, voice gruff with frustration. "Failed 3 handler assessments. Too intense, they say. Doesn't follow traditional commands. Might be unsuitable for service." The dog's gaze met Sarah's, and she recognized something familiar: determination, focus, and a hint of defiance that mirrored her own. Their first weeks together had been challenging. Max tested every boundary, pushing Sarah to her limits with his unconventional responses and seeming disregard for standard protocols. But she noticed something others had missed: his extraordinary intuition. During a routine patrol in their 2nd month, Max had suddenly pulled her away from a building seconds before its snow-laden roof collapsed. No alert, no training protocol, just pure instinct that saved her life. That moment changed everything. Sarah started trusting Max's judgment, even when it defied standard procedure. He, in turn, channeled his intensity into unwavering loyalty. Together, they became Atlanta PD's most successful K9 team, known especially for finding missing persons that other units couldn't track. Their success rate wasn't built on following rulebooks. It came from their unique ability to read each other and trust their instincts. Now, watching Max hover protectively over the rescued puppies in her warm kitchen, Sarah recognized that same intuition at work. The strange marks on their ears sparked a troubling memory. Similar cases had surfaced across 3 states in the past month. Puppies left in extreme weather, always purebred, always marked with distinct patterns. The FBI suspected an organized breeding ring, but evidence kept disappearing before they could build a case. Max's low whine pulled her from her thoughts. The smaller puppy had started moving more vigorously, but the larger one remained worryingly still. Through her frosted window, more shadows moved in the snowstorm, and Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her service weapon. She knew Max would protect these puppies until his last breath, just as he'd done for her countless times before. The veterinarian's headlights finally pierced the darkness outside. Max immediately positioned himself between the door and the puppies, his exhausted body somehow finding new strength. Sarah placed her hand on his head, feeling the unshakable trust they'd built over years of partnership. His fur was still cold and damp from his vigil in the snow, but his stance was steady, protective. Dr. Martinez hurried in, medical bag in hand, but stopped short at Max's low growl. "Easy, boy," Sarah said softly, and Max relaxed slightly, though his eyes never left the vet. 7 years of partnership had taught Sarah to read every subtle shift in Max's behavior. Right now, despite his exhaustion, he was alert to something beyond their immediate crisis. As the vet began examining the puppies, Sarah noticed Max's attention shift to something outside. His ears twitched in a pattern she knew well. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. The same instinct that had saved her life before was telling her that these puppies were just the beginning of something much darker. The larger puppy finally stirred under Dr. Martinez's careful ministrations, letting out a weak cry. Max's ears immediately swiveled toward the sound, but his body remained oriented toward the window. Looking at his determined stance, Sarah remembered why they'd been paired in the first place. Two outcasts who saw the world differently. Their strength wasn't in following protocols, but in trusting each other's instincts. Tonight, those instincts had saved 2 lives and might have uncovered something much bigger than either of them realized. Outside, the storm intensified, but Sarah's mind was already racing ahead. Tomorrow, she would begin investigating the markings on the puppy's ears, tracking down connections to other similar cases. But tonight, watching Max maintain his vigilant guard despite his exhaustion, she knew one thing for certain. They had stumbled onto something dangerous, and their unconventional partnership would be tested like never before. The sound of breaking glass from her backyard shattered the moment. Max's head snapped toward the noise, a low growl building in his throat. Sarah drew her weapon, nodding to the vet to stay with the puppies. Whatever was coming, she and Max would face it together, just as they always had. Detective Sarah Collins spread her case files across the dining table as dawn broke over Atlanta. The puppies were safe at the emergency clinic, but Max remained restless, pacing between windows, his nails clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floors. Last night's break-in attempt had left only broken glass and footprints that vanished in the storm. A professional job that spoke of careful planning and execution. The distinctive markings on the puppy's ears matched 5 other cases across Georgia and Tennessee. Sarah pinned photos to her evidence board, stepping back to study the pattern, all discovered during extreme weather conditions. All purebred, all bearing the same geometric patterns burned into their skin. Her coffee grew cold as more connections emerged. Sophisticated thefts from elite breeders, vanishing show-quality puppies, and a disturbing string of veterinary clinic break-ins where only records were taken. Her phone buzzed with preliminary lab results. The marks weren't tattoos, but precise chemical burns, a signature method used in underground breeding operations for tracking bloodlines. More disturbing were the traces of experimental pharmaceuticals in their system. These weren't just stolen pets, they were test subjects in something much darker. The report highlighted compounds typically used in behavioral modification research, drugs that hadn't yet been approved for veterinary use. Max's sharp bark drew her attention to the window. A black SUV cruised past her house, its windows tinted mirror dark in the morning sun. Sarah noted the plate number in her log, knowing from experience it would lead nowhere. The real evidence lay in her backyard, boot prints in the melting snow, perfectly aligned with her security camera blind spots. Someone had studied her house, her routines, her security measures. This wasn't random. They'd chosen her location specifically. Sergeant Davidson's call confirmed her growing fears. 2 more in Marietta, Collins. Same marks, same setup. Got word the FBI's Animal Enterprise Terrorism Unit is involved now. Whatever this is, it goes deep. He paused, his voice dropping. Watch your back. These people aren't amateurs. Sarah watched Max, who hadn't slept since their discovery. His eyes tracked something beyond the window that she couldn't see, muscles tense beneath his thick fur. 7 years of partnership had taught her to trust those instincts without question. She pulled up property records, marking foreclosed homes in her neighborhood, perfect staging grounds for surveillance operations. The vet's update sent a chill down her spine. While the puppies were stabilizing, their blood work revealed sophisticated pharmaceutical markers. Similar patterns had surfaced in cases across the southeast. An organized network was using stolen puppies for testing, exploiting weather emergencies as cover for their operation. The drugs in their system suggested research-grade compounds, pointing to connections with legitimate laboratories. Her phone chirped with an anonymous text. "Back off, Officer Collins." Max growled at the device, hackles rising along his spine. They'd struck a nerve. Sarah scratched behind his ears, feeling the tension in his muscles. These people had been watching, but they'd miscalculated. Max hadn't abandoned his post last night. He'd been exactly where he needed to be, protecting those puppies. The surveillance footage revealed their critical mistake. That black SUV passing her house every night for a week, not watching her, she realized with sudden clarity, studying Max's patterns, waiting for their moment. But they hadn't counted on the unbreakable bond between handler and dog, or their ability to communicate without words. Max froze at the window, body utterly still. Sarah killed the lights and joined him, hand instinctively finding her weapon. A shadow moved between houses in the pre-dawn darkness. Another piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place, and this time they were ready. As Sarah checked her weapon, a memory surfaced. Max's first case, another snowy night, another rescue. They'd uncovered a fighting ring that night, saving dozens of dogs. But this was something far more sinister. The puppy dealers weren't just selling pets, they were running a sophisticated underground testing operation. And somewhere in her quiet neighborhood, they were watching, waiting for her next move. The larger question loomed: why her house? Why these puppies? Max's low growl provided the answer she'd been avoiding. They weren't watching her house. They were watching Max himself, Atlanta's top K9 officer, the perfect unwitting tracker for their operation. His incredible success rate in finding missing persons made him the ideal subject for their surveillance. The pieces clicked into place as emergency vehicles screamed past her window. Another report of abandoned puppies, right on schedule. But this time, Sarah and Max weren't just following the trail. They were setting a trap. A quick check of the weather forecast showed another snowstorm approaching, perfect conditions for the dealer's next move. Sarah loaded her weapon and checked Max's tactical vest, adding an extra GPS tracker for insurance. Tonight, they'd be ready. The hunters were about to become the hunted. Behind her, Max's ears suddenly pricked forward, his body tensing in the way that always preceded action. A car door slammed in the darkness. Sarah dimmed her phone, watching shadows move across her front lawn. They were early, but then, so were she and Max. Sarah leaned against the wall beside her window, finger resting near her weapon's trigger. The forecast had been right. Another snowstorm was building over Atlanta, and this time they were prepared. Max sat motionless beside her, both watching the unmarked van parked 2 houses down, its dark outline barely visible through the swirling snow. Through her tactical scope, she counted 3 men inside the vehicle. Professional-grade equipment cases lined the back seats, not the usual tools of petty thieves. The FBI's files had revealed a disturbing pattern. The group specifically targeted K9 officers, using their dogs' exceptional tracking abilities to test experimental training methods and behavioral drugs. Max's ears twitched at a sound too faint for human ears. Sarah tensed, remembering the rescued puppy's chemical burns and needle marks. Her throat tightened with anger at the thought of what they'd endured. The surveillance team thought they were watching her house, but her team had been in position for hours. Agent Torres and his specialized FBI unit were scattered across neighboring houses, waiting in the darkness. A car door opened silently in the growing storm. 2 figures emerged from the van, carrying what looked like professional pet carriers. Sarah's hand tightened on her radio, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The puppies last week had been merely a training run, she realized. Tonight was their real operation, and Max was their primary target. The first tranquilizer dart hit the snow beside her window with a soft thump. Max remained perfectly still, years of intensive training keeping him silent, despite his natural instincts to alert. A third figure emerged from the van, carrying something that made Sarah's blood run cold, a sophisticated control collar designed for testing behavioral modifications. She'd seen the devastating effects of similar devices in previous cases. Max's muscles coiled beneath his tactical vest, ready for action. Sarah gave the predetermined signal through her radio. Suddenly, floodlights blazed across the street as FBI teams emerged from their hidden positions. The suspects bolted toward the back alley, but in their haste to escape, they missed the most crucial detail. They were running directly into the area Max had been methodically marking all week, leading them exactly where Sarah wanted them. Through the chaos of shouts and running figures, Sarah spotted a familiar black SUV turning the corner, the same vehicle that had been surveilling her house. The operation's mastermind, finally emerging from the shadows. But tonight, they had an advantage they hadn't possessed before. The same storm that had brought these criminals to her neighborhood would also aid in bringing them down. Snow swirled between the houses as Sarah and Max moved in perfect synchronization, their years of partnership evident in every coordinated movement. The tranquilizer darts meant for Max whistled harmlessly past as they closed in on their targets. The criminals had studied their patterns, analyzed their routines, but they'd fatally underestimated one crucial element: the unbreakable bond between handler and dog. Behind them, FBI teams were already securing the van and its damning contents: experimental drugs, surgical equipment, and detailed files on canine units across 3 states. But Sarah's focus remained on the black SUV, now attempting to navigate the increasingly treacherous streets. Max's tracking abilities had been this group's main interest. Now those same skills would be their undoing. The storm intensified, visibility dropping to near zero. Perfect conditions for what came next. Sarah smiled grimly as she heard Agent Torres confirm all teams were in position. The trap was set and their quarry was heading straight for it. Max's purposeful marking had created an invisible corridor, herding their targets exactly where they needed them. In the whiteout conditions, headlights suddenly flared as the SUV realized its mistake too late. The vehicle slid on the ice exactly where Max had indicated it would. Sarah watched as the carefully laid trap sprung, the culmination of a week's patience and planning. The hunters had become the hunted, undone by the very skills they had sought to exploit. Through the squad car's window, Sarah caught a glimpse of the driver's face, a prominent researcher whose veterinary license had been revoked 3 years ago. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, revealing the full scope of their operation. But it wasn't over yet. Files found in the van suggested more facilities, more experiments, more innocent animals at risk. Max stood alert at her side, snow collecting on his tactical vest, eyes fixed on the ongoing operation. They'd won this battle, but Sarah knew there would be others. Somewhere out there, more puppies needed saving, more criminals needed catching. But for now, watching the suspects being led away in handcuffs, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The storm was beginning to ease as the last suspect was secured. Sarah knelt beside Max, brushing snow from his fur. His intelligence and loyalty had not only saved those puppies, but had helped uncover a criminal enterprise that had eluded law enforcement for months. As if reading her thoughts, Max turned to look at her, his amber eyes reflecting the flashing lights of the police vehicles. Their work wasn't finished, but they had struck a significant blow tonight. Agent Torres approached with evidence bags containing the control collars and syringes. "We've got them, Collins," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "The evidence is solid, but there's more, much more. We're going to need you and Max again." Sarah nodded, already anticipating their next move. The storm had passed, but another kind of darkness still needed their attention. 3 weeks after the raid, Sarah sat at her kitchen counter reviewing case files. The investigation had uncovered a network of black market research facilities stretching across 5 states. Max dozed at her feet, finally relaxed after weeks of heightened vigilance. The rescued puppies, now named Storm and Shadow, played in her fenced backyard. Their recovery had been remarkable. All traces of experimental drugs gone from their systems, their chemical burns healed into faint scars. More importantly, their trust in humans had returned, thanks largely to Max's constant attention. Her doorbell rang. Max was instantly alert, but his tail wagged as he recognized Agent Torres's scent. "Final briefing," Torres said, settling at her counter. "The FBI raid in Tennessee found their main lab, 23 more dogs rescued, including 6 puppies with matching chemical burns. But here's what you'll want to see." He slid a photo across the counter. The black SUV's driver in an orange jumpsuit. Dr. Elena Kovac, former pharmaceutical research director, had confessed to everything. The operation had been testing military-grade training compounds, using stolen puppies to perfect the formula before targeting police K9s. Their goal, creating a drug that could override years of police training, turning K9 officers against their handlers. Max had been their prime target, his exceptional abilities making him the perfect test subject. The puppies were meant to draw him out, test his protective instincts. Instead, his bond with Sarah had exposed their entire operation. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the vet clinic. Storm and Shadow's final checkup was clear. No lasting damage from their ordeal. She watched through the window as they chased each other through the snow, their playful barks filling the air. "The DA wants you both to testify," Torres continued. "These cases are starting a national conversation about K9 officer protection. The FBI's setting up a specialized task force, and they want Max as their training model." Sarah smiled, reaching down to scratch Max's ears. Their partnership had not only saved lives, but was changing how law enforcement protected their 4-legged officers. The puppy's ordeal had exposed a dark operation, but it had also revealed something more powerful: the unbreakable trust between handler and dog. "One more thing," Torres added, pulling out official papers. "The judge approved your adoption request. Storm and Shadow are officially yours." That evening, as snow began falling again, Sarah watched Max playing with his new family members in the backyard. The puppies had grown stronger each day, their personalities emerging. Storm, the smaller one, was clever and quick, always trying to outsmart Max in their games. Shadow, the larger pup, was gentle and protective, already showing signs of Max's vigilant nature. A movement caught her eye, headlights passing her house. But now, instead of tension, she felt pride. Their ordeal had transformed her quiet street into a symbol of hope. 3 K9 officers had moved into the neighborhood, creating an informal protective network. The criminals had chosen her house thinking Max was vulnerable in his off-duty hours. They hadn't understood that a handler's bond with their dog never truly turned off. Max led the puppies inside, shaking snow from his fur. All 3 dogs settled by the fireplace, the puppies snuggling against Max's warm bulk. Sarah sat beside them, reports scattered around her. Cases of missing dogs were being reopened across the country, patterns emerging that had been missed before. But tonight wasn't about cases or evidence. Tonight was about healing, about family, about the incredible capacity of dogs to trust again after trauma. Max's head rested on her lap, his amber eyes half closed in contentment. Storm and Shadow's soft snores filled the quiet room. Outside, the snow continued falling, but this time it brought no danger. Instead, it reminded Sarah of nature's cycle of renewal. Like the spring that would follow this winter, new beginnings could emerge from the darkest circumstances. She ran her fingers through Max's fur, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat of her partner, protector, and friend. Their story had started in snow and darkness, with a loyal dog standing guard over innocent lives. It would continue in light and warmth, with that same loyalty now multiplied 3-fold. Sarah looked at her expanded family, one brave police dog and 2 rescued puppies, and knew that sometimes the happiest endings grew from the coldest nights. Agent Torres's words echoed in her mind. Their case was changing laws, improving protection for canine officers nationwide. But here, in her warm living room, Sarah knew the real change had been more personal. Max had shown her once again that true loyalty knew no bounds, that courage wore many forms, and that family could be found in the most unexpected moments. The fire crackled softly as Sarah closed her case files. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new dogs needing rescue. But tonight was for celebration, for quiet joy, for the simple pleasure of being home together. Max's tail thumped softly against the floor, a steady rhythm of contentment. Their long night's watch was over, replaced by the promise of brighter days ahead.